Tiberius, the heir to Augustus and Rome's second emperor, had many rumours surrounding his cruelty. He came to be known as the emperor who didn't want to rule Rome. Regardless of this, Rome did still grow while he was emperor. This is Desocrates, and in the second episode of my Roman Emperor series, we're going into the history of Tiberius. Starting with his birth, Tiberius was born in Rome on 16th of November 42 BC to Tiberius Claudius Nero and Livia Drusilla. Both of his biological parents belonged to the gens Claudia family. His mother was also a member of the Livii family, an ancient plebeian but prominent family. Not much is known of Tiberius's early life, but in 39 BC, his mother Livia, while pregnant with Tiberius's future brother, divorced her husband and remarried to Octavian, also known as Augustus. At the age of 9, Tiberius delivered the eulogy at the funeral of his biological father at the Rostra. In 29 BC, he rode in a triumphal chariot along with his adoptive father Augustus in celebration of the defeat of Antony and Cleopatra at Actium. In 23 BC, Augustus became severely ill, and his possible death with no designated heir to his power would have plunged the Roman world into even more civil conflicts. Because of his near death, the question of Augustus' heir became more prominent. Amongst the possible heirs included were his general Agrippa, his nephew Marcellus, and of course Tiberius and his brother Drusus. At the age of 17 in 27 BC, Tiberius entered into politics under Augustus' direction, receiving the position of quaestor. He was also granted the right to stand for election as praetor and consul 5 years younger than the age required by Roman law. The same was done for his brother Drusus. Not long after, Tiberius began appearing in court as an advocate, and it was very likely at this time that his interest in Greek rhetoric began. In 20 BC, Tiberius was sent east under Marcus Agrippa in order to negotiate with the Parthians. The Parthian Empire had captured the standards of the Roman legions under the command of Marcus Crassus in 53 BC, Decidius Saxa in 40 BC, and Mark Antony in 36 BC. After a year of negotiating, Tiberius led a sizable force into Armenia, most likely to establish it as a Roman client state and end the threat it posed on the Roman-Parthian border. Tiberius successfully restored King Tigranes to the throne of Armenia, remaining the client state of Rome. Tiberius and Augustus also managed to reach a compromise with the Parthians where the Roman standards were returned to them. Now on to some marriage. Tiberius' first marriage was to Vipsania Agrippina, the daughter of Augustus' close friend and most famed general Marcus Agrippa. He was then appointed to the position of praetor and was sent with his legions to assist his brother Drusus with campaigns in the west. While Drusus focused his legions in Gallia Narbonensis and along the Germania frontier, Tiberius fought the tribes in the Alps and within Transalpine Gaul, conquering Raetia. In 15 BC, he discovered the sources of the Danube and not long afterwards the bend of the middle course. When he returned to Rome in 13 BC, Tiberius was appointed as consul, and around the same time his son Drusus Julius Caesar was born. With Agrippa's death in 12 BC, both Tiberius and Drusus were elevated in respect to the succession of Augustus. Under the orders of Augustus in 11 BC, Tiberius divorced Vipsania and married Julia the Elder, Augustus' daughter and Agrippa's widow. Tiberius was very reluctant to do this, as Julia had made advances on him while they were both still married to their previous partners, Tiberius being happily married. Suetonius claims that when Tiberius ran into Vipsania again, he followed her home crying and begging for her forgiveness. Soon afterwards, Tiberius met with Augustus and steps were taken to ensure that Tiberius and Vipsania would never meet again. Tiberius continued to be elevated by Augustus, and due to Agrippa's death and his brother Drusus' death in 9 BC, now seemed to be the clear candidate for succession. In 12 BC, he received military commissions in Pannonia and Germania. Both areas were highly dangerous and of key importance of Augustan policy. In 6 BC, on one of his military campaigns, he launched a pincer movement against the Marca Manni. Tiberius set out northwest from Canuntum on the Danube with 4 legions, passing through Quadi territory in order to invade Marca Manni territory from the east. At the same time, General Gaius Sentius Saturnius would depart east from Moguntiacum on the Rhine with 2 or 3 legions, passing through Annet's Hamandori territory and attacking the Marca Manni from the west. The campaign ended up being a massive success, but Tiberius could not fully subjugate the Marca Manni because he was soon summoned to the frontier on the Rhine to protect Rome's new conquests in Germania. He returned to Rome and was made consul for a second time in 2nd BC, and in 6 BC was granted tribunal power and control in the east, positions that Agrippa had held before him. In 6 BC, while on the verge of accepting command in the east and becoming the second most powerful person in Rome, Tiberius announced his withdrawal from politics and retired to Rhodes. His motives behind his withdrawal are unclear, but could have been various things, such as his failing marriage with Julia, or some believe that Tiberius and Drusus were only meant as caretakers until Julia's two sons by Agrippa, Gaius and Lucius, were old enough to be adopted by Augustus and came to age. Tacitus believed that his failing marriage to be the main reason for Tiberius moving to Rhodes, a reflection of his hatred for Julia and his longing for Vipsania. Tiberius, forbidden to see the woman he loved, found himself married to a woman he loathed, and publicly humiliated by her nighttime adventures in the Roman Forum. Tiberius's withdrawal was potentially extremely bad for Augustus' succession plans, as Gaius and Lucius were still in their early teens, and Augustus, now in his 50s, had no immediate successor. There are some stories, however dramatic, that tell of Augustus pleading with Tiberius to stay, even going so far as to stage a serious illness. Tiberius' response was to anchor off the shore of Ostia until word came that Augustus had survived. He then sailed for Rhodes. There are reports that say Tiberius actually regretted his departure and requested to return to Rome several times, but each time Augustus refused his requests. After the departure of Tiberius, the succession of Augustus rested solely on his two young grandsons, Lucius and Gaius Caesar. The situation became even worse with the death of Lucius in 2 AD. Because of this, and potentially pressure from Livia, Augustus allowed Tiberius to return to Rome as a private citizen and nothing more. In 4 AD, Gaius was killed in Armenia, so Augustus had no other choice but to go back to Tiberius. He was then adopted by Augustus as his full son and heir. In return, Tiberius had to adopt his nephew Germanicus. To go along with his adoption, Tiberius also received tribunal power as well as a share of Augustus' Maius Imperium, something that even Agrippa may never have had. The powers that Tiberius held were now made equal rather than second to Augustus' own powers, and in the event of Augustus' death, he would simply continue to rule without any potential upheaval or pause. According to Suetonius, after 2 years in Germania in 10 to 12 AD, Tiberius returned and celebrated the triumph which he had delayed, also accompanied by his generals for whom he had obtained the triumphal regalia. Also before turning to enter Rome, he dismounted from his chariot and fell at the knees of his father who was presiding over the ceremonies. The consuls had passed a law soon after this that Tiberius should govern the provinces jointly with Augustus and hold the censors with him. Because of this, he set out for Illyricum after the end of the ceremonies. But Tiberius was recalled right after leaving, finding Augustus still alive but in his last illness. He spent the entire day with him in private. Augustus then died in 14 AD, a month before his 76th birthday. He was cremated with all due ceremony and, as had been arranged, named a god of the Roman pantheon. His will was also read and Tiberius, now a middle-aged man, was confirmed as his sole surviving heir. Tiberius peacefully took power with no one challenging him. The Senate met on the 17th of September to validate Tiberius' position as Princeps, and as it had been done with Augustus before, grant him its powers. Tiberius already had the powers of the Princeps, but he lacked the titles Augustus and Patra Patriae, father of the country, and he also refused the civic crown. Just like Augustus before him, Tiberius may have wanted to represent himself as a reluctant yet devoted public servant, no more than an ordinary citizen who wanted to serve Rome and its people to the best of his ability. Instead, his refusal and reluctance to accept the full powers and honours that came with Princeps were actually taken as insults to the elite who offered them. To them, it was signs of hypocrisy, not humility. According to Tacitus, he insulted the Senate, saying that they are men fit to be slaves. The Senate and Tiberius would continue to not get along during his rule. His direct orders were quite vague, but in his first few years as emperor, Tiberius seemed to have wanted the Senate to act alone, with no reference to him or his responsibilities as Princeps. The Roman legions in Pannonia and Germania had not been paid the bonuses promised to them by Augustus, and showed signs of mutiny when it was clear that Tiberius had no intent on responding. Germanicus and Tiberius' son Drusus Julius Caesar were dispatched with a small force to stop the uprising and bring the legions back under control. Germanicus took charge of the mutinous troops and led them on a campaign across the Rhine into Germanic territory, promising that whatever treasure they could grab would count as their bonus. They ended up taking all the territory between the Rhine and the Albi, including Teutoburg Forest, where Pharos previously lost Rome's legions years beforehand. Germanicus took back the standards lost that day, then upon his return was awarded a full triumph, increasing his already high popular standing. In 18 AD, Germanicus was granted control over the eastern part of the empire, and this was interpreted as a sign that he would be Tiberius' successor. He ended up dying just over a year later, having accused Calpurnius Piso, the governor of Syria, of poisoning him. Piso was put on trial and, according to Tacitus, for some reason threatened to implicate Tiberius of poisoning Germanicus. Whether he could prove it or not, rather than continuing the trial when it was clear that the Senate was against him, Piso committed suicide. In 22 AD, Tiberius shared his tribunal authority with his son Drusus and began making yearly trips to Campania that reportedly became longer and longer every year. In 23 AD, Drusus died under mysterious circumstances, and Tiberius seemed to have made no effort to find a replacement as heir. Then in 26 AD, Tiberius moved to an imperial villa complex he had inherited from Augustus on the island of Capri, a popular holiday retreat for Rome's upper classes. Lucius Aelius Sejanus had served the imperial family for almost 20 years when he became Praetorian Prefect in 15 AD. As Tiberius became more fed up with the position of Princeps, he began to depend more on other people, and more specifically on Sejanus and the Praetorians. In 17 or 18 AD, Tiberius had trimmed the ranks of the Praetorians responsible for the defence of Rome, and had moved it from encampments outside of the city walls into the city itself, giving Sejanus access to somewhere between 6,000 to 9,000 men. The death of Drusus elevated Sejanus, at least in the eyes of Tiberius, who now refers to him as his socius laboram, meaning partner of my labours. Tiberius even had statues of Sejanus made throughout the city. Because of this, Sejanus became more and more visible as Tiberius began to withdraw from Rome altogether. Then with Tiberius' withdrawal in 26 AD, Sejanus was left in charge of the entire state, including the city of Rome. Sejanus' position was still not exactly that of a successor. He had requested marriage to Tiberius' niece in 25 AD, but under pressure he quickly withdrew the request. The Praetorians under Sejanus also controlled the imperial post, and therefore the information that Tiberius would receive from Rome, and the information Rome received from Tiberius. The presence of Livia seems to have checked his power for some time, but her death in 29 AD changed that. Sejanus began a series of purges of senators and wealthy equestrians, removing those capable of opposing him, as well as extending the imperial treasury and his own. Nero Julius Caesar and Drusus Caesar were both arrested and exiled in 30 AD. They later all died in suspicious circumstances, leaving Tiberius with even less choice of an heir. The only survivors were Caligula, Agrippina the Younger, Julia Drusilla, and Julia Livia. In 31 AD, Sejanus held the consulship in Tiberius' absence. Sejanus then seems to have covertly attempted to court the families close to the Julian family in an attempt to integrate himself into the Julian family, getting adopted and therefore making it possible for him to be princeps. Julia Livia was later revealed to have been Sejanus' lover for several years, and there was a plot involving the two of them to overthrow Tiberius, and either assuming the principate themselves or serving as a regent. In 31 AD, Tiberius finally took some form of action when Sejanus was summoned to the Senate, where a letter from Tiberius was read aloud, condemning Sejanus and ordering his immediate execution. This next bit is according to Tacitus. Tiberius ordered the death of everyone who had any accusation of working with Sejanus. Family and friends were not allowed to be near them, to weep over them, or even to gaze upon them for too long. Spies were set around them who noted the sorrow of each mourner and followed the rotting corpses till they were dragged to the Tiber, where no one dared to burn or touch them. To note, some historians do disagree with Tacitus' portrayal of Tiberius. While Tiberius was in Capri, rumours started as to what exactly he was doing there. Suetonius records the rumours including many sexual things, including with children, some cruelty, and most of all his paranoia. These rumours did come from the Senate, and as briefly mentioned, the Senate and Tiberius did not get along, so whether it's true or not you can decide, but it does at least show how the Senate viewed him. The whole affair of Sejanus and the final years of treason trials had permanently damaged Tiberius' image and reputation. After the fall of Sejanus, Tiberius had completely withdrawn from Rome, and the empire continued to run under the bureaucracy established by Augustus, rather than through the princeps. Suetonius records that he became paranoid and spent a great deal of time thinking about the death of his son. Tiberius now did very little to plan or secure his succession and to allow the Principate to continue after his death. The Julian family and their supporters were diminished thanks to Sejanus, and Tiberius' immediate heirs were all dead. The only possible candidate was Caligula. Tiberius made a half-hearted attempt at the end of his life to make Caligula a questor, therefore giving him some credibility as a possible successor. Now on to some death. Tiberius died in Misenum on 16th of March 37 AD, some months before his 78th birthday. Tacitus relates that the emperor appeared to have stopped breathing and that Caligula was then being congratulated on his succession to the empire. When news arrived that the emperor had revived and was recovering, those who had moments before recognized Caligula as ruler fled in fear of Tiberius' wrath. Meanwhile, Macro took advantage of the chaos and instead smothered Tiberius with his bedclothes. Suetonius reports several rumours, including that Tiberius had been poisoned by Caligula, starved and then smothered with a pillow. That when he was recovering and finding himself deserted by his attendants, he attempted to rise from his couch but fell dead. According to Cassius Dio, fearing that Tiberius would recover, Caligula refused his request for food, insisting that he needed warmth, not food. Then, assisted by Macro, he smothered the emperor in his bedclothes. After his death, the Senate refused to vote Tiberius the defined honours that had been given to Augustus. Mobs filled the street yelling "to the Tiber" with Tiberius. The bodies of criminals were usually thrown in the river. However, Tiberius was cremated and his ashes were placed in the mausoleum of Augustus. In his will, Tiberius made Caligula and Tiberius Gemellus his joint heirs, but Caligula's first act on becoming Princeps was to void Tiberius' will. A small bit about his legacy. Tiberius, although seen as reluctant and cruel, did leave the imperial treasury with nearly 3 billion sesterces upon his death. Rather than embarking on costly campaigns of conquest, he chose to strengthen the existing empire by building additional bases, using diplomacy as well as military threats, and avoiding getting drawn in petty matters between frontier tyrants. Let me know what you think of Tiberius in the comments. If you enjoyed and want more videos like this, then remember to subscribe to my channel.